I always believe that innovation happens at the grout between the tiles. So if you can connect different experiences, different worldviews, you get more than the sum of its parts. And I think that's what this conclave is about, and that's what, although, I actually have a pair of shoes, sneakers, like that color exactly. So I'll be happy to send you, it's on my Instagram, you should check it out. So not all corporate types wear those sort of shoes. So, but that's I think, the idea that we are greater together than we are individually. I see that in my role, I bridge several walls like this. Academia and practice is one. Marketing and technology is another, right? The corporate world and startups is another. So I think you should always meander around at the grout between the tiles. That's where a lot of fun happens. And by boundary spanning and by cutting across silos, you get insights. So, and in my work, I work with the elephants and I work with the mice. So I've spent a lot of time on big company advisory and board sorts of things, but also working with a bunch of startups. So I like to share with you my learnings and my experiences. So I'm going to sort of go through a fairly structured approach here because we are, I think, short on time and I need to move fast. And we will apply digital compression, 1:2, 1:3. And, but I want to sort of share 5 ideas with you. First, just sort of, I saw this bumper sticker in California which said, technology is the answer. Now, what was your question, right? So before I get to jump into, here's how you dance with startups, it's like, kar kya rahe? It's like my colleague Sanjay, who I wrote a book with, you were just talking about him. So the key insight in our book was KKH, we call it, which is karna kya hai, right? So why are we doing this, right? So what is the logic? Why is life not good without, partnering with startups? Then, once we have the motivation, then we want to understand what are the goals. What are both parties looking for, right? And because at the end of the day, a partnership is about achieving a joint goal. And each of you have to have clarity about your goal, the partner's goals, and therefore the joint goals. Third, then we'll look at is how. What are the different modes? And by the way, here I'm going to take the corporate's perspective. There are dozens of mechanisms for collaborating with startups. Incubators, EIRs, and acquisitions, M&A, corporate business development, hackathons, you name it. So we'll go through some of those modes and offer a framework that helps you structure sort of why you want to engage, what are the pros and cons of different modes. Then we'll talk about steps, right? What are the, I always believe that every presentation should have 3 sections. What, so what, and now what, right? So this is sort of the so what, but now what is the steps in the collaboration and some best practices. So a lot to cover, but I'll go through it fairly quickly, and hopefully we'll have some time for dialogue in the end. So why should we collaborate with startups? I was talking to the chief scientist of Sun Microsystems, this was 10 years ago, and he said something that stuck in my mind. This is exactly what he said to me. He said, the smartest people don't work for you. Right? So you might think you have you might be Tata, you might be, Reliance, you might be whatever, but you have no monopoly and expertise. And by the way, I'll add something to this quote. The hungriest people in the world don't work for you. My brother is an entrepreneur in Boston, and he tells me, I have a simple principle of hiring. He's the CEO of now a public company. He says, always hire younger, brighter, and hungrier than you. So that's a simple rule. And by the way, we get threatened by people who are smarter, but he said, I should be the dumbest, oldest, stupidest, and fattest person in the company as a CEO, right? So that way you're ensuring that so the idea here is that, that you need to tap into, one of the books I'd written 10 years ago was called The Global Brain. It was a metaphor for the idea that there is an ecosystem of expertise and talent that's outside your 4 walls. And you simply, as expertise becomes more specialized, as expertise becomes more diverse, and as it becomes more distributed, it is impossible to gather all that expertise under one roof. You simply do not have enough money, enough talent. And by the way, those people not only don't work for you, they don't want to work for you, right? So that's the other thing. They want to be entrepreneurs. So overall, the mindset in innovation that we need to think about is a shift from a very simple idea, the lab is my world, to the world is my lab, right? A shift from sort of a invention model, innovation as invention, to an idea of innovation as connection. So the concept of connected innovation, the concept that innovation actually is a co-creation act, as Ranjan was just talking about, co-creation. And, so the sort of stereotype we have about the invention model is Xerox PARC, AT&T, Watson Research Center, and where you have skunk works teams working away at and coming up with the eureka moment. That's not how innovation works. It's actually a messy and a collaborative process, and increasingly it's a community process. It's a process that is driven by, and now of course, you see open source, you see collaborative marketplaces, and the network has really made it possible for people to connect and collaborate in ways and at scale that was not possible before. So we need to harness this new potential, and what companies need to do is to create an innovation ecosystem around themselves. And this innovation ecosystem actually needs to have specific nodes. Each node needs to be managed proactively. These nodes can include entrepreneurs, NASSCOM's 10,000 startups, incubators, universities, research institutions, VCs, private equity folks, e-marketplaces, innovation marketplaces, industry consortia, professional society, alumni, so this is actually when IBM talks about their innovation ecosystem, there are 15 different nodes, and in each node they have somebody managing, what they do within that. So, by the way, the flip side of this is also true. If you look at one of these nodes, it's universities. So what we need to do as universities is, for example, at my research center, I run a research center of technology and innovation at Kellogg. One of the things that we are doing is actively partnering with corporations. To give you a quick example, one of the things we've done with Bosch and with Allstate and with Best Buy, companies like that are, Bosch came to us and said, we want to figure out what's happening with the IoT cloud and industrial applications. They are big leaders in IoT. It's an 80 billion euro company. I didn't even know they were that big. And so they said, we want to understand what are the opportunity spaces, what's happening in the construction industry. So we created a business challenge. It was a 3-month sort of challenge for our students where we brought them together and they ideated and came up with some very interesting use cases that have gone up to the board at Bosch. We did the same thing at Allstate, where they said, we want to figure out how to monetize all the data that we are getting from the applications, driver data, because now you have an app and they have 2 million drivers who use the app every time they get in the car. So my students, in collaboration with the engineering students, it was a 3-way collaboration with the engineering school, Kellogg and Allstate, came up with essentially a predictive algorithm where you get in the car and on that trip it will tell you how likely you are to be in an accident. Based on driver data, road conditions, traffic conditions, and time of day, all that went into the algorithm. And and they are actually now rolling out that product as a safe driver programs on the app. So the app will tell you, don't take this road, actually take that road, because today you're more likely to get into an accident on this road because there's more traffic. Literally, it works like that. So an example, if you think about it, is if you think about companies like Unilever, IBM, and others, they've started to build these ecosystems. And this is an example of the Unilever ecosystem, where you have supplier networks, you have contract research in universities, you have JVs, you have science park relationships, you have scouting networks, which include these e-marketplaces, you have corporate venturing, and then you have NGO partnerships to reach out into rural areas and so on. So, so this is actually, as you think about it, this doesn't just happen by accident. You actually need to create roles. You need to create specific organizational units and responsibility. You have to make investments. You have to embed yourself into incubators. So this is a proactive exercise, right? So overall, I'd say, large corporations and startups, it seems to be a marriage made in heaven, right? Because large corporations have everything that startups don't. They have the most important thing, and by the way, the number one thing that I do when I'm working with a startup and I can help them with is access to markets and access to customers, right? Because corporations have access to customers, and that access is so valuable for a startup company that simply, you may have a great product, but you have no route to market. But you come to me, I'm on the board at Geo, you come to me and say, I got 200 million people. You want access to, and by the way, I can target them down to the individual customer, because I know 300 things about them, each customer. So that's a lot of, if I'm an education startup, yesterday I met an entrepreneur, he's built K-12 content that is adaptive learning and all that, but his problem is, अब मैं किधर लेके जाऊँ इसको, how do I find customers? So I said, either we have 200 million people, soon we'll have 400 million, बंद कर देंगे एयरटेल वगैरह को, so just joking. So access to markets and customer base, right? So that is, by the way, as a startup, you should always think about OPC, other people's customers. How do I get access to your customers? So that's what they're looking for. They're also looking for capital. They're looking for, another very important thing that they look for is validation, right? Startup is looking for validation of a concept, particularly if you're a B2B startup. Going into a Citibank or getting a Hindustan Lever or somebody like, now they're called Unilever, it should be Hindustan Lever in my days. So getting access to them as a customer. In fact, there was a concept I used to talk about with corporates. I said, you should do venture purchasing. Because the idea that I'm placing an order with you for software that I'll use at Goldman Sachs means I should own 5% equity in you. Because I just validated you. The moment you have me as a customer, your valuation goes up. So, so that's what startups are looking for. Economies of scale, domain expertise, companies, they've spent a lot of time trying to understand their customers and markets. On the other hand, large corporations are slow, right? So what startups have is, they're creative, they move fast, and they're pathologically optimistic, right? I mean, really, if I remember talking to the founders of there's this portal called Excite. They were number 7, but they had done quite well. So I talked to the founder, Jerry Krause was the co-founder. So I said, Jerry, you were number 7 as a portal business. What make you think that you could win? He said, we were young and we were unencumbered by reality. If we just knew what we were getting into, it was stupid. But they don't have, sometimes it's good that entrepreneurs don't know all the checks and balances. They don't have the babus telling them, ye nahi hoega, iska budget nahi pass hoga and all that. They just go out and luckily they have some also pathologically optimistic venture capitalists who will keep investing, in the hopes of returns. Because the VCs also know, you win 2 out of 10, that's good enough. So without that, so startups have a much greater likelihood of exploring nooks and crannies and niches and blue ocean opportunity, whatever you want to call them, the white spaces, that are not big markets today. Because the problem with an IBM or any big company like that is, if it's not $1 billion today, I'm not interested. Markets don't appear as $1 billion at day one. They appear as glimmers on the horizon, weak signals. The universe sends you weak signals. And those weak signals are peripheral. They never come from the center. This is the tyranny of the served market. Your served market is never going to give you. It's a mutual admiration society. It's like they have Barney in the US, right? I love you, you love me, and nothing happens. Because you're not exploring, the customers are pissed off or are not doing business with you. Your peripheral vision as a corporation is extremely poor. Because you're constantly focusing on your served customers. This is a startup that will tell you, there's something going on here, there's something going on there. And by the way, there's something disruptive. And by the way, they have nothing to cannibalize. So if you have nothing to, they said that God built the world in 6 days, that was because he didn't have an install base. Right? So there's nothing to fear. There's no fear of cannibalization. It really holds a lot of, because corporates have a really hard time with disruptive innovation. We have a festival it's an American festival, Thanksgiving, right? We eat a lot of turkeys, so the expression goes, the turkeys don't vote for Thanksgiving, right? So no corporate wants to vote for something that's going to kill it or disrupt itself. But I put a question mark at the end of marriage made in heaven, because those marriages that are made in heaven actually sometimes are also turn out to be hell. Because there are a number of, so if this was so easy, why won't everybody be doing it? Turns out it's not so easy. First of all, there is a cultural incompatibility. You know, a startup fails to understand why it takes you 6 months to do due diligence, and why there are 500 people involved in approvals, and why do I have to go through so many rounds of this and that? So there's basically, you know, I call this I'm an electrical engineer, I remember a term, impedance mismatch, right? So you have basically a difference in the clock speed and the difference in the way that people think. And conversely, you know, for example, if you come to me as a startup, in fact, I was working with a startup and they had built a compliance solution, a real-time compliance for IT assets. So they were asked, I introduced them to Wells Fargo, big bank. So the Wells Fargo had a long list for them. You know, what is your cybersecurity, this thing, have you done this testing, are you Basel compliant, you know, for SOX compliance, this. So they're like, what is all this? Why did he say, well, you know, I have 200 million customers, and you don't put your software on my system and crash the whole thing. So you have to go through all of these certifications, you have to go through all of this. And as a startup, you've never heard this word, compliance, right? You've never heard cybersecurity. Wo kya hota hai? Let's try it out, see if it works. You can't do that, not with a big bank. So that discipline, while it, you know, so it's very difficult for both parties to understand this. There's a lack of trust, right? For good reason, you know, that mera idea leke bhag jayega, right? They'll steal my idea, they'll steal my IP. And by the way, as a startup, I have to tell you, I worked with many, you have zero Zippo IP protection. What are you going to do? Pursue or prosecute your talent against Microsoft? Good luck with that, right? They have $100 billion of cash, you have one person and a dog, right? So you have to actually, so it's sort of that lack of trust. Then from a corporate standpoint, a lack of clarity of goals. You know, this is nowadays, this whole jugalbandi thing, you know, it is also innovation, no, lots of things, AI, innovation, these are all fashion buzzwords. So don't make this into a buzzword. So it's like, we karna hai, you know, why? It's everybody else is doing it. This reminds me of, you know, people of this whole partnership is like teenage sex. You know, everybody wants to do it, you know, everybody thinks the other person is doing it. Nobody actually knows how to do it, and when they try it, it's not very good. So, you know, so you have to be careful that if you don't have a clarity in goal, just don't do it because fashion hai aajkal to partner with startups. You have to have a clarity of goals, and you have to have executives behind you, because the executives have to understand that these startup partnerships may take 2, 3, 4 years to fructify. And if you're running it with the same KPIs and the same dashboard, you know, last quarter, what were our revenues from this partnership? It says 0, agle quarter bhi 0 hai. Uske agle quarter bhi 0 hai. So they lose patience. So you have to have a very, you know, patient capital and a clear, you know, alignment of interest in organization ownership. So it's not, this stuff is not easy. That's why, you know, we're having this discussion. So what are our goals? I love, my favorite strategy book is Alice in Wonderland, and there's a lovely quote there. Alice says to the cat, says, which road should I take? She said, where do you want to go? She said, I don't know where. Then the cat said, then it doesn't matter. Any road will take you there, right? So if you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So let's be clear about why are we doing this. So the goals from the corporate perspective, some partnerships with startups are about sourcing new technologies. This is what Cisco does a lot of. They want a ringside view. In fact, I remember talking to the Cisco M&A guys. I said, I was in the Valley, I've met 17 startups who are doing the Cisco killer gigabit Ethernet router. I said, don't you panic that there are all these people out to kill you? So they said, we love these guys because 17 of them are trying experiments for us. 15 will fail, 2 will succeed, we will buy them, right? And if we ran that 17 experiments ourselves, it would be way too expensive for us. But we watch them very closely. We know exactly what's going on. We know all of the, you know, so that's the idea of scouting technology. Sometimes it's spotting customer trends, because startups are looking and finding customer trends that you might not be aware of, that you might not be seeing on the ground. Sometimes it's about accelerating time to market. It's just about sort of getting to market faster, because the startup may have built a product or they may have built a customer base. Look at WhatsApp and Facebook. I mean, they built a customer base that you can't replicate. Platform leadership. This is a big agenda for the technology platform leaders. Google, Facebook, Microsoft, you know, these companies, Apple, that if you want to, so for example, if I am Facebook and I see video, okay, and I see image, Instagram is an acquisition, Google, YouTube is an acquisition, because they want to ensure that they are participating in the spaces of tomorrow, and their platform is being extended into adjacent spaces in a way that sustains their leadership, right? For fostering disruptive innovation. You know, if the turkeys don't vote for Thanksgiving, you have to farm the turkey outside, right? So you have to basically look for startups. So this is an example, Allstate partnering with Esurance, which is a direct-to-consumer insurance company, and Allstate's agents would never let it go direct to customers. So they looked at Esurance, they partnered with them, and ultimately they ended up acquiring them. They're still keeping them at arm's length. Same thing with Walmart and Jet.com, right? So that the idea of acquiring that disruptive capability that they didn't have. Sometimes, by the way, it's just for acquiring scarce talent. I met this entrepreneur like 6 months back, and he said, good news, my company got acquired. I said, kitne mein hua? So he said, $10 million for my company. He said, I said, your company didn't get acquired. They acquired 5 engineers. It's $2 million a pop. He said, you know, it's the going rate in Silicon Valley is $2 million an engineer. So if it's $10 million acquisition, he didn't buy anything. He bought 5 engineers. He said, forget what you're working on, start working on my stuff. It's called an acqui-hire, right? So sometimes it's just about talent. Because that poor guy has gone and done the recruiting, he's found 5 good engineers, jo tumko nahi milenge, so, you know, it's an HR, outsource HR function. That's also well. And injecting entrepreneurial DNA. This is what, by the way, Jet.com is doing inside Walmart. Lower, who's to run Jet.com, is now running e-commerce for Walmart, right? So from a startup concept perspective, validation of the business concept, customer access, market access, technology access, distribution channel access, capital access, and a potential stepping stone to an acquisition. So that's what both parties are looking for. Now let's look at modes. What are the different modes of collaboration? So I find it useful to structure this in terms of 2 dimensions. The level of integration that you seek in that relationship with the startup, right, which is you want to leave them completely independent, or you don't get too involved in their business, to the other extreme, where you actually end up owning them. That's one dimension, the x-axis. And the y-axis is resource requirements, which, by the way, tends to be somewhat correlated, because obviously if you're involved more deeply, you have to invest more resources, but not necessarily. There are some off-diagonal elements too. So, for example, a university partnership. I joke, you know, that there are dogs and there are cats, right? Dog is high investment, high return. A cat is low investment, no return, right? So as a pet. So same thing, university partnership. It's a low investment, low return. You know, you say, acha, we'll sponsor SBAC 2018. ठीक है, you know, अच्छा है. But it's sort of like, it's a good place to start, but it's not the level of resources being committed, and you're not getting involved in the governance and so on. So by the way, when would that work well? When you're doing peripheral scouting, right? When you're just sort of saying, so this is a fantastic place to come to really understand what are the trends, what are people thinking about, and so therefore you can see how these mechanisms can actually be arranged in a portfolio, that this might be your starting point for looking at peripheral vision, but then as you get closer you may need an incubator and so on, right? So there are free tools. What does free tools mean? So if you go to IBM or you go to Microsoft will give you Azure credits. You know, IBM will give you access to the Bluemix platform. So it's basically Google will give you access to their platform, the Google Compute Engine. AWS, Amazon will give you AWS credits. So that's basically giving you tools, so that you can. This is particularly useful if you want startups to work on your platform. Then there's innovation marketplaces, like Nine Sigma, Innocentive, and so on, where you can actually connect with inventors. There's co-development of products. There's EIRs, entrepreneurs in residence. And then there's outright acquisitions. There's corporate incubators. So let's look at some examples, right? So joint development. Unilever does a fantastic job of this, where they've got an initiative called the Unilever Foundry. By the way, AT&T also has, funnily, the same name, AT&T Foundry. So the idea here is that any startup can come. So this is very interesting. Unilever puts out pitches, briefs. So they're not looking for random startups to reach them. They're saying, here's the brief. We're looking for whatever, gluten-free chips or whatever. Or we're interested in natural Ayurvedic, cosmetic products. So the brief, and the benefit of this is that the briefs are aligned with their strategic priority. So they put out the briefs, and the startup comes and says, I have something for you that I can pitch. By the way, it's not really necessarily a startup, it's an inventor. So, this is very, very early stage. And then, once they sign a partnership, they agree to a pilot, and then they enter into an arrangement with them. So, this effectively, what is this? It's outsourced R&D, right? You're basically extending your R&D organization, and you're giving out these chances. So, here are some examples of sample briefs, connected ice creams. Ice cream with IoTs inside, so I think you should put into the ice cream so that you know what happens after they eat it also. You can track the guy, But anyway, I think this is about the cabinet, inventory management, so on, or digital dentists for their oral care business and so on. So that's the briefs, right? So what they did, they launched it in 2014. So they've actually done over 100 pilots with startups. So the process is they post a brief online, it's 10 weeks, 80 to 100 startups they've been getting on the average application. They select 5 to 6 to pitch, and within that, then they take at least one project as a pilot. If the pilot is successful, they sign a partnership. So basically, the reason this works is it's a clear, simple, and transparent process. So this is very simple. If you're a corporate, you can do this kind of outreach. Another sort of variant of that is an idea contest. So in an idea contest, you're again putting out a business problem, and you're seeking basically a challenge. You're saying, here's a problem I want solved, and here's a prize. This can be external, this can be internal. So Siemens has done these externally, like emotional LED lighting. Right, light and moods, come up with sort of, ideas for that, or smart grid innovation and so on. They also do it inside the company. By the way, sometimes you have 100,000 people, 250,000 people who work at Siemens. They themselves constitute a very important startup potential inventor base, right? So idea contest is another way. Then you have e-marketplaces. So this is an example of a company that I tracked 20 years ago. They've been around for more than 20 years. It's called Innocentive. It's basically a marketplace for innovation. Over 300,000 PhDs and scientists who are on this, and essentially companies put up challenges. Here's a business problem that you want to solve. So in some cases now, instead of putting up individual problems, they also have allowed people to set up booths. So this is an example of the United States Air Force, that they have set up this booth inside of Innocentive, where they have a constant list of problems that they are, challenges that they are pushing forth, and whether the prize money goes from $5,000 to $1 million. So that's another way. A friend of mine once told me, he says, you're the smartest person I know. I said, you need to meet more people, right? So this is the problem, that you don't know enough inventors. These people have access to 300,000 inventors and scientists and PhDs. And by the way, in emerging markets, significant percentage of the awards on Innocentive are won by Eastern Europeans and Indians, including the retired head of CSIR and so on. They've won a bunch of. Because after you retire, what do? You go bother your spouse or whatever, or instead of that, you just problem solve karo, So then there is a little bit less directed. By the way, in these cases, you notice that the company was putting out the problem. In scouting, I don't know what I'm looking for. I'm just like headhunting. I'm just looking around. So General Mills does this. They do scouting two ways, analog and digital. Analog scouting is this. They do events. They participate with, inventor events, startup events, and they basically go and meet with inventors. They invite people to come and talk about what they're working on. But then the proactive approach is GWIN, which is their global innovation network. So here they invite ideas, and this is a little bit more like the earlier discussion, where they have domains of interest, that we are interested in organic food, we're interested in the innovative packaging solutions and so on, and you come and talk to us. Then a more deep level of engagement that goes up in terms of level of commitment and resources is corporate incubators. So here's an example, a BMW startup garage. So in the startup garage, basically
startups can apply. Now here the startup comes and say, I've got an idea. I've got an idea for a connected car. I've got an idea for something new to do with battery technology and so on. So they are chosen by the innovation management team at BMW, and then they go through a training program, and they are engaged with the BMW innovation team, and then they come up with a functional prototype. They also get assistance, financial and technical assistance within the group to draw up a business plan, build the prototype. So it's a much more deep engagement. Another example of this is, what Bosch is doing in Chicago, and I was part of this exercise, where they have built something called the Connectory. So the Connectory so Chicago has a very large incubator called 1871. There are over 500 startups there. So within 1871, Bosch has taken 20,000 square feet and has set up the Connectory, which is the IoT startup incubator. So any idea that any entrepreneur who comes to 1871 with an IoT idea, Bosch says, yahan baith jao, because I want to create a community within a community of the IoT startups. And they have Bosch executives there, and they are they embed. So this is interesting that Bosch has gotten embedded inside an incubator. So imagine that NASSCOM has these incubators all over, right? I was in the Bangalore one, the 10,000 startups thing, I would tell you those guys would really benefit from some corporate sitting there and giving them some sense. There was this guy sitting, I saw, "Aise kya kar raha hai?" So he says, "I'm making a chip for humidity detection, IoT for ag tech. Agriculture will tell me field." So I said, "Where is your pilot?" And he said, "No, I'm just making the chip." I said, "Who is you? You talk to farmers," and I'm just making the chip. So there would be some benefit of corporates coming there and said, "Here's the use case, here's some application." Because I see there in these young startups at the NASSCOM Incube, a lot of technology, a lot of interesting creative guys, but if they met a business and bit them in the ass, they wouldn't know it, right? So there's value there, right? Sometimes these things can be autonomous units. By the way, this is the antidote to disruptive innovation not being done in the core business. So this is actually a startup within a corporate. So this is Castrol's InnoVentures. So Castrol's InnoVentures is arm's length. It's kept outside, and they work on creative and innovative projects that are disruptive in nature. And they also partner with startups to do this. AT&T has something similar. They call it EDO, Emerging Devices Organization. And the EDO's job is to actually do disruptive stuff. And one very important thing about that organization is it does not report to or connect to a business unit. It reports into the CEO directly. We have the same thing at Reliance, the Jerusalem incubator we just invested in. So you keep it at arm's length, and because you don't want the business units dictating the agenda. All right, what are the steps in collaboration? So first, clarify the collaboration goals. Figure out what resources are going to be required on your part and on the startup's part. Make sure you have buy-in from the leadership. By the way, this is one thing I really emphasize. If you don't have the board and the CEO and the leadership involved, don't try this. This is a middle management exercise. It's not something that's done at the middle management level. Define what is the risk level. Sometimes when corporates partner with startups, they're like, "Why are you doing this? This is too risky." They're like, "Yeah, that's why I'm a startup." Right? So you have to know what is your stomach. By the way, it's okay when they're taking the risk, but now if I've made an investment in you, now your risk is my risk. So now I start applying my risk management standards, and that doesn't work. So you have to decide what is your appetite. And if their appetite is not high for risk, then don't make an equity investment. Just become an observer or give them some space or whatever. Right? Decide what modes of collaboration you want. Create a clear organization point of contact. By the way, at AT&T, when they did EDO, they appointed Glenn Lurie. He was a very respected business executive, knew the business unit heads very well, and they put him in charge because it has to be a credible person, because tomorrow he's going to have to sell this idea inside the businesses. So he has to be credible with the heads of the businesses, right? And then you need to secure buy-in internally. So one of the things that you start with is that the NIH and Wiki syndrome. NIH is not invented here. Wiki is we know everything. What is it that the startup can teach us? We have all the smartest people. So you have to really be humble and accept that you have no monopoly in expertise and that people outside, crazy people, can have better ideas than you. You need to make sure that you are communicating across the enterprise to get the buy-in within the business units or who, because that startup, in order to work with your company, will need to connect with different parts of your mammoth organization. Somebody needs to help them navigate that. You need a GPS for your company. And I have seen startups get lost in the corridors of bureaucracy. 6 months they're wandering around saying, "Baat kisse karni hai? Who are the people? Right? Who am I supposed to speak to? You know, I don't even know which floor to get off on the elevator when I go to your corporate mansion." Right? You also need new units. At Procter & Gamble, they set up EBD, External Business Development. There's a specific person in charge. And the way to fund this is business units should approach you with opportunities as opposed to applying a corporate tax, a pull model rather than a push model. You also need to build capabilities. See, one thing that you have to realize today is that if you are a Unilever, you're competing with Procter & Gamble, you're competing with Clorox, you're competing with Kraft Heinz, because that entrepreneur looks and says, who should I partner with? I got 5 options. They all have portals, they all have, startup, collaboration. So I'm going to decide who's, so you have to think about your value proposition, your partner value prop. So there's a concept of becoming a preferred partner. And what is a preferred partner? Somebody who has a good track record, somebody who's responsive, somebody who's trustworthy with IP, somebody who is fair and transparent and a clear process. And your reputation will spread in the marketplace. If you cheat 2-3 entrepreneurs, the next set of startups will say, "Inke paas nahi jana hai, ye chor hai." We'll go to somebody else. So you have to, that is the idea of sort of becoming the preferred partner. And you have to also promote the platform asset. Give them it's like, here's what we can do in terms, what do I mean by platform assets? Customer base, brand, distribution. These are your platform assets. So you have to show them the value of being able to connect to those platform assets. And you have to build relational capabilities. Inside large corporations, we don't necessarily have the risk management skills, the deal-making skills, the collaboration skills that you need to work. Also, by the way, in terms of process management, startups work agile. They work with, and we work in big companies waterfall. So you need to think about how you're going to do weekly sprints and sort of adjust to that's how you overcome the impedance mismatch I was telling you about. So I'm going to conclude with a few thoughts on best practices. And I'm going to sort of say two different aspects of this. One is best practices in managing intrapreneurship, which is sort of startups within the corporate, and then best practices in collaborating with startups. So in managing intrapreneurship, you need a clear decision-making process. You want to make sure that your ownership of collaborative innovation is clear and it directly reports to the CEO and board, not to a business unit, because you want to explore opportunities that don't fit within the business units. You also want to make sure that you delegate and give them flexibility and independence. So don't ask them, how are you going to allocate resources, what's your structure, what's your strategy. All you need is make sure you have a credible executive in charge, and then you leave them to their devices. You don't micromanage intrapreneurship initiatives. You need to, at the same time, give them a very clear mission and mandate, because you want to make sure that this exploration that's going on in intrapreneurship is on strategy, with the caveat that strategy should include some peripheral vision, not just your existing markets. Reduce some of the internal barriers, right? So this requires you to actually separate the organization from your BU structure so that they can be more agile and they can work, In fact, interesting thing that Allstate has done, just like Bosch, Allstate has taken 40,000 square feet in the same incubator, 1871. They put 400 people from their connected car team and their advanced underwriting team there, so that, and what somebody was telling me was very interesting on the executive. He said, I didn't know all these people existed. Now I walk down the hallway and I meet some actuaries, I meet some interesting people. But we were lost in our corporate headquarters, but now there's just 300 people, and they're doing some really interesting business unit collaboration, cross-functional collaboration that was not possible. And in terms of startup collaboration, I say make sure you have buy-in and not just a mandate from the top, because a mandate doesn't come with buy-in. Mandate says go and do this, but I'm going to interfere, right? And I don't trust you. I'm going to watch after you. No, buy-in is basically you have you go, you run with it, and I'm going to delegate it. You have to have a champion inside your company who is the go-to person or the go-to organization. So that, very simple question I ask a corporate entity. If I am an entrepreneur, do I know which door to knock on? Do I know which single point of contact I go? This is government done a single window clearance. Or you have to do single window clearance for entrepreneurs inside your company. Otherwise, they'll get lost in the hallway. Embed your firm in the local startup ecosystem. I was giving examples of 1871. There are a lot of incubators, there's like thousands of incubators, around. So you need to find some that you can partner with. And when I say local startup ecosystem, I mean the local universities, the local incubators, the local research laboratories. You need to have points of presence that basically connect you to your community. Build the infrastructure. If you're a technology company particularly, APIs, test data, sandboxes, what's BMW doing? Physical spaces, startup garage, Bosch is doing the same. In a connectory, they actually have pods. You come in, you set up your office there, work on stuff, right? Use a portfolio of collaboration modes, because it's not one mode that does it all. You actually, particularly for a large company, you need to explore different modes of collaboration. Start moving at the startup's clock speed, right? That is because they have a different timeline, different. By the way, big companies move with budgets and startups move with milestones. And there's a fundamental disconnect between those two. Figure out what the KPIs are. Right? And the KPIs come from an understanding of your goals. So you need to know what are we trying to accomplish and how will we measure and how will we define success. Well, success is not defined as we are partnering with 88 startups, we are good. Or uska hua kya? What is the outcome? So what is the, do we have a game plan? How many initiatives, how many investments, and also which technology platform leadership we need to do. So you need to have clear KPIs. And when I say collaborate, it doesn't mean you dominate. Right, so it is really, collaboration has to be done, sort of I started out with the picture of the elephant and the mouse. So think of the elephant and the mouse having equal weight. Even though that startup might be much smaller, but it doesn't mean that you can throw your weight around, because it's meant to be a partnership of equals, even though it might not seem so. So that's my story, and I'm sticking to it. Okay. Thank you very much.
So can all these principles be applied to old people working with young people who are like startups to keep learning? And if so, how?
That's a great question. By the way, it's old people and also old companies, right?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
So old companies are all that. So
I'm equating old people to old companies, large companies, and young people to small startups.
No, I think that's a great question. I think the way to think about it is that it's not old people I'm worried about. It's the people who refuse to learn, right? So I tell some people that education is not about replacing an empty mind with a full mind. It is about replacing a closed mind with an open mind. So just age doesn't do anything. I mean, talking about old people, one of my colleagues, many of you heard about Philip Kotler. He's 85 years old. He just had a kind of a blood clot thing or whatever. He was sick. So yesterday he sent an email saying, I'm back. And by the way, here are 3 articles and a book I wrote since I recovered. I'm like, if I had that kind of energy at 85. So he's old, but the important thing about him is, I think it's a very interesting best practice, both literal and figurative, metaphorically I mean it. When he'll call me every few months and say, let's have lunch. Then he'll say, what is going on in the world of technology? And the moment I start talking, he takes out his notepad and he starts writing as I'm talking.
No, I use the word old, just to sort of, time is short. I use the word old to mean the probability of their being learning is a bit reduced compared to young people. Just like you use the word large company, not to say all large companies are bad, but you say they have a tendency to be bureaucratic, they have a tendency to have large buildings where people get lost. That's not true of every large company.
Yeah.
So answer it from that point.
Yeah, so I think that as the leadership team, you need to continually inject a culture of questioning. And, where you're saying, as I think Andy Grove was loved to say, only the paranoid survive. Or Bill Gates liked to say, we are only 18 months away from complete irrelevance. Creating that question, I'd asked this same question to Michael Dell. I was working with Dell a few years ago. I said, when Dell is doing so well, how do you stay paranoid? How do you stay afraid? And he says, we focus on the stuff that's not working. And I constantly am paying attention. This is how we could get killed. So we tend to focus too much as a leadership team on successes. You need to look at where you're underperforming, where the threats are, and don't spend most of your time on the areas that are working well. You need to look at where the trouble spots might be and stay young, stay afraid that way. And that is the important task of the leadership team, not to get comfortable and to actually, if it ain't broke, keep looking.
Okay, that's great. Just let's, Picasso, I think he said it takes a long time to get young.
Yes.
And applying that principle to a market which I'll call management education, because that's your forte.
And we are old people.
And lots of people here are from management education. How can teachers learn from students?
I think we learn from students all the time, and it's becoming more possible to do that with technology now, where you have peer-to-peer learning, and you can inject that. So for example, one of the things I'm doing in my class now is when I give people an assignment, I have peers evaluated in addition to me. And I also ask them for coming up with creative ideas. So instead of me giving them assignment, they come up with interesting questions, even case studies. I get them to help me with identifying case studies to write. So I'm constantly learning from my students, and I think that today it's really become a flipped classroom, and it's really become a flipped logic. So, so my favorite way to think about this is that I'm not a sage on the stage, I'm a guide on the side. And that is sort of the spirit in which we have to approach it. But we have to start with the idea that you can learn from students. Same not invented here and we know everything syndrome, right? So start out with the premise that I have no monopoly and expertise as the teacher, and that I have as much to learn from students, executives, entrepreneurs. And I think the other thing that requires us to do, at least personally speaking, I'm on the road, a third of the time, because I'm learning constantly from entrepreneurs, from people who are out in the field, trying interesting stuff, sitting in board meetings and working with, leaders in the business world. So we need to get out of the ivory tower. We need to get out of it. I tell to product managers, get out of the damn building. Go talk to customers. That's what we need to do as teachers. And I think that's part of the bridging.
So if you talk to companies, I'm giving the other perspective,
Yeah.
the corporate perspective, you'd say that we've been doing this all the time. What's new about it? For example, I cut my teeth in Hindustan Lever.
Right.
And we wanted a distribution system. We said, we're not going to set up our own depots and go-downs. And the evolution of the stockist system, which companies like ITC and Hindustan Lever pioneered, is a collaboration between a Lalaji in a market and a multinational. The famous case of Benetton outsourcing the shirt components is now a Harvard Business School 4-part case study, is exactly the same. The way outsourcing is done by IT, global majors for IT. India has built up a $130 billion
Business.
software industry out of partnering with biggies. TCS didn't exist 40 years ago. It was a startup. So the question that a corporate would say is, yeah, we've been doing this. Are you recommending we do much of the same in a more organized, disciplined way? But that's also a good lesson.
See, somebody I was telling them the other day, the first wireless optical network was a smoke signal, right? So that so communication has been around a long time. The only difference between smoke signal and 4G is bandwidth, right? So it's faster. So that's the thing, that this idea, no ideas are new fundamentally, but I think what has happened now is the advent of the network has allowed these connections to become
Far more vibrant.
far more global, and also have persistent and real-time connectivity with your partners. Flip side is that that same network is also creating disruption much faster. So it's a matter of speed and a matter of scale. And the third thing I will say is that today, as I was alluding to earlier, the level of depth and specialization of expertise that exists out there, you no longer can have it inside your company. So it has become more urgent to do more diverse partnering with a larger scale and with greater speed. And what is the problem? The network. What is the solution? The network. So I would submit it probably took Hindustan Lever 20 years to figure out the stockist system. Today you have 6 months. So the speed at which things are moving makes this partnering more urgent, and it also needs to become more global because the solution might be sitting in India. You didn't build a global distribution stockist system, but today everything is global. So those are some differences. It's a matter of speed and scale.
Good, that's very clear. I think we should close now with the last question for you. I was very interested in your chart number 6. I counted it.
कौन सा था वो?
हाँ, I'm coming to that. It's good to number your charts, by the way. That's where you drew those pictures of the ecosystem.
हाँ.
Now that's a generic one you have prepared, and
Yeah.
I want to know specific, because entrepreneurship is like art and poetry. It is
Yeah.
very idiosyncratic to a particular culture. Management is very process orientated. You must be repeatable, you must
Yeah.
be efficient, etc. And making these two talk, and you explained very beautifully all the challenges. Question for you is, what would you change in that chart specific to India, if any?
I think that the rather unfortunate thing is that, and actually that is the reason we're having this conclave, I would not be able to build as vibrant a connection to universities, research institutions, laboratories, because that R&D, private R&D expertise, scientific
not so
intelligence is
abundant.
not that. And also the mechanism, I mean today, the smoothness with which a Stanford engages with the startup ecosystem is nowhere close to what an IIT can achieve, or even when you go down to regional, that culture isn't there, and we have these strange sort of rules about how much faculty can make income and doing consulting and all that. So we've created a lot of bureaucracy around us. So that's one area that would be. On the flip side, engaging with entrepreneurs, I would go much deeper and broader, but I would need to build listening posts that are more diverse. Because again, the level of organization of the incubator, like in the US, I could reach out to 10 incubators and get a huge amount of reach. I could reach out to Northwestern, I could reach out to Stanford, I do 5 university collaborations and I'm done. I think in India, it's much more like, to give you a retail analogy, we are unorganized retail, right? As opposed to so I can't go do a deal with Walmart, I have to go to 1,000 Kirana stores. So it'll be a more distributed system.
So I have a suggestion for you, and please say yes.
Yes.
And to Ranjan. This is the 333rd innovation conference I'm attending during my 50-year career.
ये सबका हिसाब रखते हैं 6 slide 333 conference.
So
सवाल कितने पूछे हैं आपने?
I want you to guide SPJIMR, and my request is to SPJIMR faculty to work with your guidance on developing an Indian innovation ecosystem, allowing for some of the natural deficiencies, cultural factors. I think it will be a good contribution to innovation. So Ranjan, task for you. Mohan has agreed. He has said yes before I finished. Thank you very much.
No, thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks a lot.